This is Tim Bryce with my column entitled The Golden Age of Children's TV. Now for a bit of nostalgia. I was recently up on a Philadelphia website doing some research when I stumbled upon an old kiddie show I watched back in the 1950s. I couldn't have been more than 3 years old at the time, but memories of the show came flooding back to me. I happened to tell my wife about the show, including its plot and puppet characters, and she looked at me like I had lost my mind. Before I reveal the name of the show, which only someone from the Philadelphia, New Jersey, or Delaware area will remember, I prepared a list of the children's television shows from years ago and contemplated their impact on my generation. As a note, since I primarily grew up in the Northeast and Midwest, some of these titles will not be recognizable to everybody. Maybe you'll remember some of these programs. If not, it will give you some insight into how the baby boomers think. First, there was Alvin and the Chipmunks, which was a cartoon series originally produced in the late 1950s, early 1960s. The premise involved a trio of singing chipmunks, Simon the intellectual, Theodore the chubby one, and Alvin the mischievous one. Their manager was David Seville, who produced their music and tried to keep them out of trouble. The group made some songs that reached the pop culture, but it was the cartoon series that perpetuated them for many years. Their TV show included a series of shorts featuring Clyde Crash Cup, an imaginative inventor, and his shy assistant, Leonardo, who could only be heard whispering to Clyde. In the 1980s, following the death of their creator, Ross Bagdasarian Sr., the voice of David Seville, the group was updated and re-released to the public. Next we have Beanie and Cecil, the creation of Bob Clampett. It originally started out as a puppet show, but became a popular animated series in the early 1960s. The show featured Beanie, a young boy, and Cecil, the seasick sea serpent. The two would go on adventures with Cecil, making wisecracks and puns, and Dishonest John was the bad guy. The Sandy Becker Show. Becker was one of the handful of pioneers of children's television on WNEW-TV in New York, Channel 5, which is now WNYW. Others included Soupy Sales and Sonny Fox. Sandy's show featured puppets and characters with funny voices. The show was just plain fun and entertaining for kids after school. His most bizarre character was Hambone. Bozo the Clown was both a cartoon and a franchise featuring a circus clown. He appeared on local channels throughout the country, with Chicago's WGN version becoming the most popular. Bozo was so popular, to attend the show, Chicago parents had to order tickets 1 year in advance. Captain Kangaroo ran for 38 seasons from 1955 to 1984 and featured Bob Keeshan as the captain, who was supported by a cast of characters like Mr. Green Jeans, guests, and puppet characters such as Mr. Moose and Mr. Bunny Rabbit. The captain may have been somewhat sedate, but Keeshan was interested in teaching moral values while entertaining children. Next we have Chatter. Chatter's World was produced by WBKB Channel 7 in Chicago as a series of black and white shorts. It starred a talking chimpanzee that would get in and out of trouble. The voice of Chatter was comically unique. Circus Boy. Kids gravitated to this 30-minute black and white show as it combined a circus with the Old West. It featured Corky in the title role and played by Mickey Dolenz, later of the Monkees fame. Corky's big responsibility was care for Bimbo, a baby elephant. What kid wouldn't want to ride or take care of a baby elephant? Next we have the Cisco Kid, graduated from radio to television in the 1950s. Unlike most westerns at the time, which were shot in black and white, the Cisco Kid was one of the first to be shot in color. The show starred Duncan Ronaldo as Cisco and Leo Carrillo as the fun-loving Poncho. Next we have Clutch Cargo, which was an adventure cartoon series featuring limited animation. To compensate, filmmakers superimposed the lips of the actors to make it seem more realistic. Clutch was assisted by his ward Spinner and his dog Paddlefoot. Crusader Rabbit was the first animated series produced specifically for television. Although the stories were interesting, the animation was primitive, particularly when you compare it to Disney or Warner Brothers. Walt Disney Presents. Early Sunday nights were Disney nights and hosted by Walt. The show featured cartoons, nature films, and adventure series such as Davy Crockett, which became incredibly popular. Diver Dan was an adventure series of film shorts in black and white featuring a sea diver in an old-fashioned diving suit who would talk to passing fish. The show was filmed through an aquarium to give it the illusion of a water effect. The fish were actually marionettes. The antagonists were Baron Barracuda and Triggerfish, who were always trying to undermine Diver Dan. Miss Minerva, the beautiful mermaid queen, also talked to the fish, but shyly avoided Diver Dan. Then we have Fireball XL5, which was a spaceship, part of the World Space Patrol. It was filled in super marionation, in other words, puppetry, and originated in the United Kingdom. The futuristic look to the show made it popular, particularly at a time in the 1960s when we were engaged in the space race. Hanna-Barbera. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were the creators of MGM's Tom and Jerry cartoons and became the most prolific producers of animated cartoons in the 1950s and 1960s, including Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, Yogi Bear, The Jetsons, Top Cat, and many others. The Flintstones became their most popular series and the first to play during prime time. The series itself was a takeoff of Jackie Gleason's The Honeymooners. Jonny Quest was particularly popular with young boys as it featured the adventures of Johnny and his father, scientist Dr. Quest. He was accompanied by Race Banyan, Haji, and Johnny's dog Bandit for comic relief. The animation was more lifelike than the other Hanna-Barbera series. Hot Dog was an imaginative show created by Frank Buxton, who explained to children how things were made, including hot dogs, hence the show's name. To add levity to the program, Buxton would interview Jonathan Winters, Woody Allen, and Joanne Worley, who would offer bizarre answers for how things were created, thereby becoming a favorite among adults as well as children. Next we have Howdy Doody, who was a marionette dressed in cowboy garb. The show was hosted by Buffalo Bob, who was dressed in buckskin and quickly became a favorite of the Peanut Gallery, a set of bleachers for kids attending the show. There were other characters used for comedy relief, such as Clarabelle the Clown, who would honk horns and squirt people with seltzer, and Chief Thunderthud, who coined the greeting, Cowabunga. Jungle Jim was played by an older Johnny Weissmuller, who had retired as Tarzan. Jungle Jim was a black and white syndicated show featuring Weissmuller as a hunter and explorer. He was accompanied by his teenage son Skipper and supported by Hassim, an Indian servant. There was also Tamba, the chimpanzee. Although the show was theoretically set in Africa, Jungle Jim also visited Asia and other places. For kids, Jungle Jim was the next best thing to Tarzan. Just for Fun was hosted by Sonny Fox on New York's WNEW-TV Channel 5. Although Fox was perhaps better known for Wonderama, which ran on Sunday mornings, Just for Fun was on Saturday mornings and featured contests between teams of kids. The winners would inevitably win more games and toys than they could carry. Kukla, Fran, and Ollie was created by Burr Tillstrom and originated out of Chicago. It featured two puppets, Kukla, a clown, and Ollie, a one-toothed dragon. Fran Allison sat in front of the two and controlled the dialogue. The humor was gentle but very entertaining. Next we have Lassie, a beautiful dog that appeared at times to be smarter than her owners. Kids loved this animal, particularly at the end of the show when she would offer a paw to the audience. The show was so popular on Sunday nights that it competed with Disney. The Sherry Lewis Show. Lewis was a puppeteer and actress. Her principal characters were Lamb Chop, Hush Puppy, and Charlie Horse, all possessing endearing personalities. Lewis had an instinctive way to make kids laugh while teaching them positive lessons. Next we have the Lone Ranger. The masked man of the plains graduated from radio to the television screen in the early 1950s. Clayton Moore played the quintessential ranger, as did Jay Silverheels as Tonto. The two were positive role models, as they always fought for truth and justice. Then we have the Chuck Mccann Show. The noted comedian began his career in New York on WPIX, where he developed nutty characters and skits for children. Then we have the Mickey Mouse Club, a Disney project started in the mid-1950s and featuring Jimmy Dodd as host and the Mouseketeers Ensemble, who would sing and dance. Actress Annette Funicello got her start on the show, as did many others over the years. The show would also include serials such as The Hardy Boys, featuring Tim Considine and Tommy Kirk, and Spin and Marty, starring Tim Considine and David Stollery. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood featured Fred Rogers and was considered the PBS version of Captain Kangaroo. Rogers' character was very mild-mannered, so much so comedians such as Johnny Carson and Saturday Night Live would make parodies of him. Next we have the Muppets. Long before Sesame Street, Jim Henson's Muppets gained notoriety on the Jimmy Dean Show in the late 1950s. That's right, the singer who sold breakfast sausages. In particular, Rolf the dog became a favorite with adult audiences. My Friend Flicka was first created as a book, then produced into a movie. The TV version was set in a fictional ranch in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and featured Ken McLaughlin, the son of a rancher, and his horse Flicka. Popeye the Sailor was a newspaper comic strip and an animated series which got its start in the 1930s. An updated version of Popeye was produced in the 1950s with the same characters, his girlfriend Olive Oyl and rival Bluto. His secret to his strength was a can of spinach. By doing so, he increased the sale of spinach significantly. Then we had the adventures of Rin Tin Tin. Rin Tin Tin had long been a movie star. For television, though, the setting was the Wild West, where the famed German Shepherd accompanied Rusty, a boy being raised by the soldiers on a U.S. cavalry post known as Fort Apache. Rocky and Bullwinkle was a cartoon series produced by Jay Ward. The show starred Rocket J. Squirrel and Bullwinkle J. Moose, who would go from one adventure to another, usually fighting Boris Badenoff and Natasha. The series also featured cartoons entitled Fractured Fairy Tales and Sherman and Peabody, featuring a brilliant talking dog. The cartoons were loaded with puns and wisecracks that would often go over the heads of children, but quickly picked up by adults. Romper Room was a long-running syndicated show for children. Like Bozo, Romper Room was franchised to local media outlets throughout the country. Modeled after a kindergarten, the hostess played the role of teacher and would talk to the students on the set as well as those in the television audience. The kids loved her magic mirror where she would extend greetings to children who mailed in their names. The show taught manners, the Pledge of Allegiance, and offered a Romper Room prayer to God. Imagine that. The Roy Rogers Show was a 30-minute black and white show featuring the King of the Cowboys. Rogers was a beloved character by children everywhere. He teamed up with his wife Dale Evans, his sidekick Pat Brady, who drove a Jeep named Nellie Bell. There was also Rogers' Palomino named Trigger and his German Shepherd named Bullet. Visiting Rogers Ranch was a dream for many kids. Roy and Dale would end the show by singing Happy Trails. Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. Like the Lone Ranger, Sergeant Preston began on radio and graduated to TV. The show told of Preston's exploits as a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. His trusted dog was Yukon King and Rex, his horse. And they always got their man. Next we have Sky King. America's Favorite Flying Cowboy was another 30-minute black and white series. King was based in Arizona and chased bad guys and performed search and rescues. He was assisted by his niece Penny and Clipper, his nephew. The real star of the show, though, was Songbird, a sleek Cessna. Then we have Soupy Sales. Was another veteran of WNEW-TV, Channel 5. His humor was considered avant-garde for his time and was aimed at both children and adults. The kids missed a lot of his jokes. He was supported by 3 puppets, Pookie, a small lion, and White Fang and Black Tooth, 2 large dogs, which you never saw on camera except for their paws. Adventures of Superman featured the late George Reeves playing the starring role. In this series, Superman only tackled local hoods and troublemakers, not villains from other planets. He was a positive role model for truth, justice, and the American way. Tom Terrific was an early cartoon designed specifically for television. Like Crusader Rabbit, the animation of Tom Terrific was very good. Tom, though, had the unique ability to magically change form to just about any object. He was accompanied by his dog, the mighty Manfred. Next, we have The Paul Winchell Show. Paul was a noted actor and ventriloquist who was accompanied by 2 dummies, the wisecracking Jerry Mahoney and Knucklehead Smith, a country bumpkin. Like Sherry Lewis, Winchell had a unique ability to connect with kids. Warner Brothers Cartoons. Saturday mornings were filled with vintage cartoons from the archives of Warner Brothers, such as Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Roadrunner, Porky Pig, Yosemite Sam, et al. It makes you wonder how we ever lived without Mel Blanc, the voice of all of the characters. And finally, we have Wonderama. Whereas Sonny Fox hosted the Just for Fun game show on Saturdays, he hosted Wonderama on Sundays, which was a more cerebral type of show for kids and originally aired for 3 hours. Fox would conduct interviews, discuss news, and exercise. Kids participating in the show would win prizes, but nothing to the degree of Just for Fun. There were also a multitude of local children's shows across the country. In Cincinnati alone, there was the Uncle Al Show, Larry Smith and his Puppets, and the Skipper Ryle Show. The local shows may not have been as polished as the national shows, but kids still flocked to them. In many of the adventure shows listed above, you will notice many of the stars had young sons, wards, or some other relative. This was a clever move by the producers, as the viewing children would associate themselves with the characters, thereby imagining they were a part of the show. The hosts in these shows were loved by the kids. Today, grown adults openly confess their admiration to these same people many years later. Before his death in the 1990s, Buffalo Bob Smith of Howdy Doody fame would tour college campuses with the marionette, where he was met by standing room only audiences. Likewise, June Foray and Bill Scott, the voices of Rocky and Bullwinkle, were also mobbed by college audiences. The bond we formed as children to these pioneers of television is something we do not see anymore, as such shows no longer exist. In terms of teaching, all of these shows promoted the concept of good conquering evil, to accept right over wrong, and the need for doing well in school. In addition to being a moral compass, they filled kids with the imagination to be adventurous, yet becoming responsible for their actions. They also provided role models and taught socialization skills. All of this combined with some simple silliness and fun. No wonder the kids became hooked on children's television. Finally, the show I watched as a young lad in the Philadelphia area was Birdy the Bunyip. It was another puppet show created by Lee Dexter, an Australian. Lee described a bunyip as a mythical Australian animal which was a cross between a bunny, a collie dog, and a duck-billed platypus. As a 3-year-old, I wasn't really concerned about what a bunyip was, just the character who seemed to be wise, good-hearted, and cared about the safety of his friends. Maybe I did learn something from television after all. Friends, keep the faith. This is Tim Bryce in Palm Harbor, Florida. Follow me on the internet at timbryce.com.